Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Karen Coel from All Chicago, and I'm here with Max Burns, our program coordinator, to do the webinar for the new project application. So just a little bit of housekeeping. So we put everybody on mute for usually for the duration of the presentation. We'll do question and answers actually throughout the webinar, not just at the end. If you have a question, you can use the raise your hand function if you want, but most people just put their questions in the chat box. And Max he'll be monitoring that, and he may respond to them immediately if he knows the answer. Otherwise, we will pause at certain periods and then ask questions. We didn't post any handouts in advance for this one, but we will post everything in either the online learning portal or we'll post it on the All Chicago website. Again, the question box is one of the little arrows you can click on the right, and then you can type your questions right in there or in the chat box, which is lower down, whichever you choose. So at every one of these, we always just like to give an overview of the team. So we do have a big team at All Chicago who helps do the process for the NOFA and all of the renewals. Actually, for this process, there's really only 3 of us who are involved, which is Dave Thomas, myself, and then Max. Max and I are going to be your key points of contact for inputting into eSnaps, and then we'll review your applications and give you feedback and make sure that you get everything in on time. So you're welcome to contact Dave, but I wouldn't really recommend that because he's just going to kick you to us anyway. So.
Also, do recognize the COC programs email is still the most effective way to communicate with us about this process because of our ticketing system, Zendesk. It enables us to systematically answer your questions and ensure that we have done so.
Great. Thanks, Max. Thanks for that reminder. So first, congratulations to everyone on the call. So we are working on you've all made it to the final round. You're all going to enter in eSnaps. That means you're all going to be part of the recommendation that we bring to the board next week, Wednesday. We're finalizing the packet for the board, so that is going out to them today, and then they will vote basically on the recommendation for new projects next week, Wednesday. So we just wanted to start you off early so that you weren't scrambling after the board meeting to get things done even faster. So anyway, so the objectives for this for today is understanding the context around the new project application process, which many of you know because this isn't your first time around. Introduction to the resources you need to complete the new project application, and then understanding how to do that in eSnaps. Also, most of the people on this call are experienced with doing either applications in eSnaps or new projects, so the presentation is geared a little bit just for those who are in the know, but if you're not in the know, because we do have 2 new projects that are from new people who are not COC funded agencies right now, and so if you need any assistance with that, please reach out to me, or if you've never done eSnaps, feel free to reach out to us too to help you with any of that, because we know there's always new people doing these things. So I just wanted to go over the NOFA, the high-level highlights. Many of you already know this already. So as you know, the double-edged sword or the Hunger Games part of this process is that HUD requires us to rank all projects in Tier 1 and Tier 2. Historically, most of the new projects have been ranked in Tier 2. So that funding is always kind of based on how we score and how everyone else in the country scores to know how much will be funded. Again, this year, the second year in a row, there's DV bonus funding. Chicago is able to apply for up to $5 million of that funding, so we're excited to put in several new applications this year for different model types. So that's exciting. The NOFA itself emphasizes employment and income. I think that's something to keep in mind when you're doing your application in eSNAPs, because we were not aware of that when we did the application process. So you may want to alter some of your answers to emphasize those elements. Again, there's evidence-based approaches, and low barrier is what HUD and the COC in Chicago is promoting, and housing first is a primary approach. We want to ensure that all of our permanent housing projects are housing first, so that's not changing. But HUD has offered projects to have service participation flexibility. So the NOFA does say you can require service participation. I would say all Chicago, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and other national entities aren't encouraging service participation requirement. I mean, I think the way I think for Housing First for me has always been there's a service participation expectation, and you should set that expectation at the beginning of when someone enters. And if you want to write that down and you want to have that clear to them, that's fine. The thing is that we don't want you exiting people because they don't meet that expectation. So we are all in the business of housing people and ensuring people stay housed. We're not in the business of evicting people or sending people back to homelessness. And that's what you need to keep in mind with service participation requirements. And then addressing racial disparities. I think this is going to be an ongoing part of the COC work overall, not just for individual projects, but we are working on that at All Chicago. As usual, most of you already know this, but all of our work is based on the Hearth Act and the Continuum of Care interim rule with the link there. The interim rule, of course, is very important with your budget and understanding what eligible costs are. Federal appropriations, all of the money we have is due to Congress appropriating this money to us. So there's over $2 billion nationally, and then the extra $50 million for the DV bonus projects is all because of Congress. And then this is a national competition. So as much as we are trying to make this a very collaborative and community-based process, at the end of the day, we're still competing nationally with every other continuum. And so the emphasis is always on performance, not of the system, but of individual projects as well. The process itself, most of you have gone through this at some level, but so right now you're at the process of completing the project application for new projects. All Chicago, who is a collaborative applicant, are collecting drafts of these and reviewing them and giving you feedback. We also complete the overall continuum of care application. And so we'll talk about how this influences whether you may get funded or not. And then, we submit all of the applications in one combined application to HUD, and that's at the end of September, which I already let you know one of the deadlines. So one of the things that the NOFA is even clearer about than previous years is that we have to publicly announce the date that all applications are due in eSNAPs. We have set that date to be August 28th, 2019. This is more than 30 days before the deadline for the full application because, we just want to make sure everything is in a timely manner because we do have a significant number of project applications. So with these applications, we're back up to like 160 to 165 applications that are in eSNAP. So even though we have a big team, that's still a lot, and we want to make sure everybody gets funded. So the entire application is due September 30th. So even though your portion is going to be done pretty soon, All Chicago is still working on making sure we have the strongest application possible. HUD always has this vague language about 2 conditional funding announcements. So sometimes HUD will say, this is how much we think we're funding, and then they'll come back and give another one later. So we always caution, if your renewal projects especially, or if this project you want to start in the first quarter of the year, I think you should really consider whether that's the best option. As you know, last year the government shutdown happened in December, and they didn't reopen until the end of January, early February. So everything got delayed then. So when you're thinking about your start date, I do not recommend the first quarter of the year personally, but we can talk about that when we get there. Deadlines. So we want you to do your application in eSNAPs and then send us a draft. So we'll talk about how you can create a PDF and send it to us. If you're new and haven't done a COC application before, we want you to submit your applicant profile as well. If for some reason you've made changes in the last like 7 days that you didn't send us before as a renewal, like please send that to us as well. And then we want a draft of your new project application. And then again, the deadline for everyone is going to be having everything in by that Wednesday, the 28th. We will give you feedback in the interim for changes you'll need to make. So I want to talk about resources because I think for new projects, you kind of need to rely on resources a little bit more. This is the main page for HUD's funding availability notification. This is where all of the resources are. And the main resources are in this red circle, which is the eSnaps navigation, frequently asked questions, and if you need to ask a question to HUD. On this page, you're going to see a section that says application supporting documents. And under that, you're going to see that there's a variety of different resources for you to look at. So how to access the project application, doing the 2880 if you've never done that. But the most important one for everyone in this webinar is the new project application, detailed instruction, and navigation guide. So the instructions are what the questions are looking for, and the navigation guide is how to do it in eSnaps. So both of those are going to be your new best friends. So especially the detailed instructions. So everyone on this call are doing various models. So the instructions are detailed for questions specific to your model. So there's overall questions that everyone has to answer, and then each model has its own section, which I illustrated here. The webinar itself is general, and we're mostly not talking about specific models. And so I tried not to number things in the webinar because your numbering can change based on your model type. So we try to do it by section, but just make sure, even doing this last night, I read both documents like 4 or 5 times. So All Chicago puts a variety of resources on our website. After this training, we'll update with some of the resources for you for that as well. eSnaps, your second new best friend, if you don't do eSnaps already, is like you're going to get used to doing it really quick. So this is the main page for eSnaps. This is where you can access a navigation guide for anything that you want to do. And they are actually nice because they give you the actual screenshot of what you'll look at. And then it tells you in words how to do that particular section. Okay, so that's how you access that. And then I included these DV bonus project resources. So for those of you who are applying under the DV bonus funding, this is some resources for you. I don't know if this tells you anything like super important to change your application or put anything in eSnaps, but it does give you kind of the atmosphere or the environment that HUD is considering these projects, and so that can be helpful if you haven't reviewed it already. And then just as a reminder, so there's certain things that All Chicago staff is really good at, and there's certain things that you should use a HUD resource for. So HUD resources are really for problems with eSnaps or technical issues. Like we are not able to help you with eSnaps, and it's a weird system, and sometimes it has glitches. So if you're locked out of eSnaps, that's where you do that ask a question. So you can say, please give me my access to eSnaps again. If the system's running slowly, it's probably because a lot of people are entering. So that's also why we try to have everything done early. So eSnaps is really HUD issues. So if you have a non-technical issue, if you're not sure about your budget, if you're not sure about any of the policies that the board adopted, we're not doing survey gizmos, so we don't have to worry about that, thank God. And then any other questions about submission, please reach out to Max and I through the COC programs email. Before we go into the details of the application itself, I thought it might be helpful for you all to understand how your application is going to be scored. If you're an awesome HUD COC NOFA nerd, you might have already read this already, but this is how HUD is going to score your application to determine whether you get funded. So if you're doing permanent supportive housing, rapid housing, the joint component, and it's not funded under DV bonus, you're most likely going to be ranked in tier 2 for our system. And so almost half of your score is based on what our COC our community application is. So the big application that all Chicago does. Last year, I would say our partners scored very high in this part. Like that was one thing that propelled their application up. And then the next part is the project ranking. So as many of you know, we have to rank every single project. And so HUD has its own math that most of us don't understand all the time, but the details are in the NOFA. Basically, they give you points based on where we rank you in the system. And then the final thing, and this is the thing, another part that you have great control of on your end, is low barriers to entry. So you can get up to 10 points for this as a permanent housing provider or joint project. So this is answering all those housing first questions with a housing first lens. This is ensuring your project description, how people are obtaining and accessing housing, how you're discharging people, that all of these are within the low barrier or housing first methodology. If you're applying under the DV bonus, which we have about 4 or 5 projects for that, similarly, a quarter of your score is on the COC score, which is good for you because, as I mentioned, we tend to score very high. The second is the need for the project in the community. So this is some of the questions we have to answer on our COC application, and I may reach out to you for some more insights if we need to beef up those answers. But the shocking part is that half of your score is based on the quality of you as the project applicant. So this is really where in your narrative sections, you show us what your previous performance is in working with survivors of DV, dating violence, and how you're demonstrating that you're trauma-informed and victim-centered. So again, that's a lot of points, and so you want to make sure that you're really addressing these parts of the exceptional work and the exceptional agency that you are in your narrative, because that's what HUD is looking for. So last year, this wasn't as many points, but all of our projects scored really, really high on this. So I think it's important for you to re-review your narrative sections for the DV bonus and make sure you're really highlighting your past performance and as well as how you're trauma-informed and victim-centered. I'm going to pause there so I can breathe for a second and see if there's any questions.
There's a question. We submitted the budget update for our new project. Does that need to be approved before we can enter into eSNAPs?
Yeah. No, you don't need approval for it. We'll look at what you submitted versus what's in eSNAPs, and if there's discrepancies, we'll just talk about it. But basically, the last amount we told you to apply for is where you need to get your budget to be. But we'll talk about the budget when we get to that section. Okay. That's all we got right now?
Yeah, that's the only question.
Great. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water before I go. Okay, so first we wanted to go through the steps of the process, which is not different than the steps those of you who are experienced are used to with doing a renewal application. Those of you who are new to this, this will be a new process, but we just want to make sure the steps are clear. And in full transparency, every year I have to look back at an old webinar to figure out how to do these steps myself. So there's 4 steps. There's the project applicant profile, there's the funding opportunity registration, there's how to create a project application, and then accessing the application through submission. So we'll go through all 4 of these steps now. So in completing the applicant profile, there are 2 separate guidances that HUD gives you. So the first thing you need to do, even before you create anything, is you need to go in and either create or update your applicant profile and verify that everything is correct. If you don't do that, information won't pull in to the main application, and it'll be very hard for you to apply. Okay. So those of you who are experienced or already have a profile in eSNAPs, you want to make sure you put your profile in edit mode so that you make any changes that need to be made. Most of you should not need to make changes because you already did that, but if you may still have an old profile if you haven't been a COC partner for a while, or you're with another COC, and so you may still need to go in there and do some edits. And then this is on the last screen, which is called the submission summary screen, and then you want to put it in edit mode. And then when you're finished, you want to click the complete button again. So these are the types of things, the sections that you have to go through. So you need to do the regular federal grant fund of your tax ID, the DUNS number, information about your organization, contact information, this stuff about congressional districts, and the code of conduct. Some of you, hopefully you've all done this already, but so those of you who are newly applying, you may already have a code of conduct with HUD. You should check this listing and make sure it's an accurate code of conduct. And then if it's not, you'll upload a new one through this process so HUD has it. Sometimes they are very slow to update your code of conduct on this particular list. So just from our perspective at All Chicago, we updated our code of conduct like 2 or 3 years ago, and they probably still don't have it updated. So we resubmit our most updated one every single year. So the major one that always kind of gives people a hiccup is this Form 2880. There's special guidance from HUD about this, so make sure you read through that because it can be a little confusing. The code of conduct is your attachment, and then this survey of ensuring equal opportunity. So those are all attachments that everyone has to provide. So those of you who are just did the renewals, you shouldn't have to check that they're up to date, but if you just want to be super secure, then you may want to. And then when you're finished, we want you to hit the complete button so that everything saves and is available for when you do your actual project application. Just again, the resources. So this is the top one is the overall guide to do the applicant profile. The second is the navigation guide. So again, that's the eSNAPS guide. And then the final one is the 2080 because HUD does acknowledge that this is kind of a challenging form for people to complete. So the next step is to go in to the next section, which is the funding opportunity registration. So the first thing you want to do, especially those of you who may have more than one applicant number, is make sure you're applying under the right applicant number. So make sure that's correct. That's at the very top. And then what you're looking for is making sure you're in the funding opportunities registration. And then you're looking down, and at some point HUD reduced the number of these in here, so it's really easy to find now because it was like you had everyone for 40 years for a while. But you want to make sure you're doing the new project application for the new portion of your grant. So many of you on the phone are doing an expansion, so you're going to have to do a new project application, and then you're going to have to do another renewal one to have the combined application. So you're going to have to make 2 new things. I didn't put that on the slide. So if you're doing expansion, check the box and register for the new project application first. You've already registered for the renewal, so you don't have to do that again. Okay, so then it's going to ask you, is this the one that you really want to register for? And then you're going to click yes. The screen will refresh, and then you just have to go back. And then when you hit the back button, that indicates that you're registered. And you may see crazy dates in the funding opportunity details. Don't worry about that. I don't know where HUD is getting those from. That is not reflective of anything for your application. So then the third step is to create the project itself. So you go over to the projects portion of the left-hand side of the menu, and you need to look for this new project application for FY 2019 from either the name on the drop-down menu or just scrolling through. And then what you should see, I would recommend filtering it because that's the only way I can ever get the little piece of paper with the plus icon to come up. But you need to find that piece of paper with a plus icon, click on that, and then enter the project name. So this is going to be your project name forever. So don't have any typos in it. If you didn't like your name on your application, that's okay. You can change it now. I would recommend something that is unique. And I would also recommend not just saying, oh, I'm doing a permanent supportive housing project or a rapid rehousing project, because then when we are looking through our list of like 160 projects, all we see is rapid rehousing. So Make it unique. If it's going to be, you know, Karen's awesome housing project dash rapid rehousing, that's fine too. Like whatever you want to do to make yourself distinct, and so that you can remember. But again, it's going to be your name forever. For those of you who are doing expansion, I would just recommend using your original project name and then do dash expansion for it. But you know, whatever you want to do, I think that would be the easiest thing. Also for our ranking portion as well. So then click Save and Back. And again, for those of you who do an expansion, you're going to do this new project application FY 2019, and then you should also do another renewal project application 2019, and this is going to be your combined expansion application. So you have to do 3 of them total. Okay, and then the last thing you need to do is go to the submissions workspace. So this is where you want to filter. I would recommend filtering by the name of the project that you just created, right? And then you'll see that pop up on the bottom. And then you click on the little file folder to open up that new project application. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions.
We have a couple.
I'm sure we do.
I'm writing this right now. So one question is to clarify, if we are an expansion, we just complete one new project application since we already completed the renewal application.
Yes.
However, they also they will do that in the new application as well as the combined.
Yeah, so anyone who's doing an expansion, you're doing 3 applications. So you're doing the renewal for the existing project, which you've already done, so you don't have to do anything more on that for Max and I. You're doing a new project application, which is what we just talked about of how to create, right? And that's only for the new stuff you're doing. So if you're expanding units or services or both, that's what you're indicating in the new project application, just the new stuff, because the old stuff is in the renewal application. And then then you need to do a 3rd application, which they're calling the combined expansion application. So that is from the renewal project funding. So the renewal project one that you did for your regular renewal, that's what you're going to make another one and call it your combined application. So HUD loves expansion, so they're making you do 3 applications this year. I know that's confusing, but we're here to help you through that. Is there another question, Max?
Yes. Should the project name be the same as the expanding project? That's up to your choice.
Yeah.
I think the convention we would recommend is stating that it is an expansion project.
For the new project?
Yeah.
Yeah, for the new project, I would say the easiest thing, like Max said, is take your old project name and put dash expansion, right? Because then when I look through and I see, oh, there's 2, there's Mara's Place Apartments and there's Mara's Place Apartment expansion, like then I know that is the 2 components of it. For the naming convention for the combined one, you can just call it, Mara's Place Apartments combined, if that's what you want to talk about, or Mara's,
Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to keep up with all these questions that come in. Paraphrasing this, I've done the new application for the expansion, and I just need to have the narratives that supports the renewal. I'm not quite sure, David, if you can clarify that. Questions, maybe I'm not paraphrasing it correctly. So would we do the 3rd combined application at this point in time? Yes, you will do the combined application now and the new application now in this process. We already have the original renewal. For the combined expansion applications, do we create another new application?
Yeah, so HUD did it weird. So HUD, basically you're doing 2 renewals. One renewal is your original, and one renewal is the combined, and then 1 new. I don't know why, but like that's the way. So it's nice though, because they're making you do the combined as a renewal, you can import all your information from the original one in there, so you don't have to like start from scratch.
Yes, if you're there's a question about can we import data if you're doing it if it's in the combined application, yes. If it is the new application for expansions, no.
Right.
Everything in the new application must be brand new. Everyone, if you're going to send questions, please send them in full questions. Sending multiple lines makes it so I have to piece together many different components to answer one.
So someone said they completed a new project application in eSnaps and submitted all to Chicago last Monday. So we did not request anyone to submit a new expansion application. So if you did that, we have not reviewed it. You do not need to create another one, but I would ensure that you review it before you submit it to us on next Monday. So many of you had to do changes to your budgets. So if you, did it early and submitted it to us, that's not the one we're going to review because we need to make sure you update your budget accordingly.
The new application narrative speak of the renewal application narrative. We discuss it as an independent project.
So, I think you can take parts of your description from your original one, and I would update it because the project description for the new project is what are you doing? Why do you need HUD money for it? Why do you think you're expanding? Why are you doing all these things, right? So you can take your old one, and I would recommend revising it to ensure that you're addressing those things. But I don't think you have to start with a brand new project description. But you will see in there that even though you're expanding, you still have to answer all of the new application questions like, how do you help people obtain and remain in housing? How do you help them access benefits? So all those old questions that you don't have to answer anymore, for the new part, you have to answer all of those, which is why in our local application, we tried to include those questions so you wouldn't have to go in and create new answers during this process. So the budget for the combined, you should be adding the two budgets together. So when you go in and do your combined one, you'll have all the old budget information from your existing project, and then you should add on to it the new amounts.
And same thing for inventory or any sort of other numerical values. It's just the combination of both applications, the new application and your original renewal put together.
Okay. Great questions. So I am going to keep moving through this so we have enough time. Again, most of you who've done this process before know that the application is divided into basically two parts. The first part is this form part, and these are all the forms that are pulling in from your applicant profile, right? So a lot of it are the forms you've already done, but you still have to go through all these screens and make sure that everything is correct. The trick is that you need to do all of part one and submit it before you can even look at the parts of part two. So I was trying to create a fake application last night and got a little freaked out because I had to submit everything before I could do the second part. So remember, it's not going to show you any of the questions until you go in and you do this part one and submit it. Okay, then the second part, and just at the high level, is these other 7 sections about, and we'll go through all of these sections: recipient, subrecipient information, project information, the housing and services, and how you're doing it in HMIS, participants and outreach information, and then budget information, and then your attachments and your submission summary. So very consistent with renewals. It's just the questions are different. Jumping into what you need to do when filling this out and some of the differences between a renewal is, so I only highlighted the questions that we think people kind of fall down on sometimes and don't do correctly. Your application type is new. It should also be standard if this is the right screen, but it's a new application. Make sure you select Illinois. The next field will pre-populate. Make sure you select whatever congressional districts the project operates in. So some of you, if you're doing things throughout the city, conceivably you could select every congressional district for the city of Chicago, for example. For the start and end dates, this for me is always the most important part, is that you need to have it start in calendar year 2020. So it has to start sometime next year, and that means that it should end in 2021. I know we talked about, is it possible to have your project start in January? Yes, in the dream world that HUD and the federal government function appropriately and everything's done and we know everyone's amounts and they get through all of the renewals, you could start in January, but our experience is that even if people say they want to start in January, nobody starts in January. So keep that in mind. I would also keep in mind that if there's a government shutdown or anything, everything's delayed. So my personal recommendation is that I would not start any grant before April, to be perfectly honest. And that's something, but every agency is different. You should consider that yourself. Last year, the HUD office was really proactive about getting things done quickly, and so some people probably could have started in April. Most people choose to start in June or later. I would also recommend, I wouldn't start in the fourth quarter of the year either, or I wouldn't start in December, because I would always be afraid that because the fiscal year ends in September, if there's a government shutdown, it's going to happen in October, November, or December. And so if you want to make sure you start in that year, I would be hesitant to start something in the last quarter. But this is only Karen's opinion. You have to do what's best for you. But these are kind of some of the recommendations that I would make. And then the last field, you can leave blank. But again, you can pick any start date you want. All of them will really start at the beginning of the year, even though if you put some beginning of the month, if you put some funky date in, HUD doesn't start anyone's grant like in the middle of the month. Everyone starts at the beginning. Okay, the next section is about compliance. This is the same question on the renewals. Everyone should select B for this one. Question 20 is based on your agency. The HUD 2880 certification, comes up. What happened there? Sorry.
Yeah. That was weird.
I don't know. Sorry. Just give me a minute to not touch things on my computer. Okay, and we're back. Okay. So 2880 is going to come up again. This is an opportunity for you to check that the information is still accurate. The drug-free workplace. These are all check boxes that you're certifying. Whatever you certify in this application is what HUD's going to hold you to in the future. So please make sure you're honest and accurate with that. So now we're getting into part 2. So the first part of part 2 is about recipient and subrecipient information. There's going to be questions that you have to talk about your agency, but if you're intending to use subrecipients, so that's like you're the grantee, and then you're going to have a partnership with another agency like to provide services, and you're going to give them some of your grant money, that's when you would use a subrecipient. So this is not for, I'm All Chicago and I'm going to work with, Christian Community Center for medical services, but we just have like a linkage and an agreement to do that. You're actually granting your money to somebody else. So very few projects or agencies do that in our system, and from the applications themselves, it doesn't sound like anybody is doing that. But if you have decided to do that, please, and you need help, please reach out to us. So in this experience of the applicant, right, so you all have to talk about your experience. This is where you're talking about how you've been effectively utilizing federal funds and performing these activities, given the time limitations. So, the joy of expansion is that even though we know you've been doing this, you have to re-justify yourself to HUD that you can continue to do this. And then it does ask about leveraging, i.e. providing match from other sectors for your particular grant. So these are questions that you probably will need to write a narrative for. And then the detailed instructions should give you assistance with that. 3 is the basic organization and management structure, and how you're coordinating with other providers, as well as your financial accounting system. So sometimes in years past, the response is great about the first 2, and the third one you forget. So, again, especially the DV projects, be really mindful of this section on experience, because this is part of where your points are coming from, showing you're an experienced organization. If any of you have unresolved monitoring or audit findings from HUD, this is where you get to disclose those that they hopefully already know about. Okay, so now we're going to part 3A, the project detail. This section is important because this is how we ensure that you're requesting and asking for funds from our continuum of care. So in 1A, please make sure you pick Illinois 510 or Chicago. Some of you work in multiple continuums, so it's very important that you pick ours so we can fund you with our money. Make sure the COC applicant name is there, which is all Chicago. Everyone should pick a standard status. The other option is appeal, so none of you are appealing right now, so pick standard. And then the next part is the component type. So you can pick joint if you're doing the joint component, and then everyone else is picking permanent housing. And then if you pick permanent housing, it's going to ask you whether you're doing PSH or rapid rehousing. So these selections are important because they influence the questions on other screens, right? So if you do mess up and realize you're not getting the right questions, you can go back and change it. So, but this is what dictates what questions you have to answer in the next sections, which is also why I didn't put numbers on any of the questions, because the numbers change based on your model type. So everyone's favorite project description. So again, this is describing the project at full operational capacity, how you're going to achieve this. For those of you who are expanding, it's probably very similar to your current description, so it's okay to put that in there. Just make sure you're hitting all of these points. So what's the scope? What's the need in the community? Who your target population is? What's your plan? Like how many beds, how many units, how you're going to set yourself up? What are the outcomes you're expecting? Most people utilize the program models chart as it currently stands to talk about outcomes, but you can also do the high level, system level outcomes about retentions, exit to permanent housing, increases of income, access to health insurance, following up to make sure people stay housed if you're doing rapid rehousing, and then how you're connecting to other providers, like what kind of linkages, what kind of services. You don't have to be specific. You don't have to make a list of all of the other providers you work with here. You can just do an overview of what are the kind of linkages and services that you work with others for. I did put a little note in about the service participation requirements. So this is only if you're going to do it. Again, our recommendation is not to have requirements, but you can set expectations. And then you need to talk about how you're going to implement them and go about doing all that. And then why you need HUD dollars. So this is one thing that we notice in the project descriptions for renewals that doesn't happen, is why do you need HUD COC dollars specifically to do this work, right? There's other money out in the world, so HUD wants to understand why you need their money. So please make sure you put that in there. You can reference other parts of the application. I'm not convinced that HUD really jumps back and forth in order to evaluate you, so it's probably best to keep your description brief and to the point. And this is the first instance where you have to really be mindful of the numbers that you're using in the application. So here, if you're saying I'm doing 20 units and 70 beds, those are the numbers you're going to have to keep consistently throughout the application itself. So there's various points in this application where you have to talk about how many households or units you have, and then how many beds or people you're actually working with. So keep that in mind. Also, don't be super detailed in saying for 2020, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So HUD doesn't really want you to be that specific from having a year or really definitive points in time. They just want to understand on an annual basis, this is what you're going to be doing. So for those of you who are new, don't feel like you have to say, this is what we're doing in 2020. You should make it specific, but general in regard to dates. So the next part is the housing component. So this is where you're going to describe your proposed activities. There's a chart in there that you're going to have to fill out. So it's going to talk about your leasing and all kinds of things like that, how you're going to reach full capacity, and what the timeline is for that. So remember, most of you are going to be working on like a year timeline to get things up and going. So participation in coordinated entry, all of you should check yes. So even if you're doing the DV bonus, and we know we're just building the airplane now to do DV coordinated entry, you should all click yes on this. We found that when DV providers check no, it kind of raises a flag, and they're like, why are you saying no? And then they have to describe a parallel process. By the time you all are funded, we're going to have DV coordinated entry going. So everyone should check yes for this question. And then one of my personal favorite questions is the special population focus. So as you can see, there's various special populations, and you're supposed to check yes if your project can demonstrate you have these things. And I believe you need to demonstrate in the description. So you need to demonstrate you have the capacity at your facility, that your program design is for the special population, you have tools that are for this special population, outreach if needed, and then outreach is less so because of coordinated entry, and methodologies, and what are those specific things. And I believe those should be in the project description. Unless you're deciding to do 100% of a special population, I honestly think most should check no for this. So if you're 100% and you're special, then you should do this. So because many of us are serving chronic households. We know that every chronic household has disabilities, but those disabilities can be varied throughout the population. So unless you're really specific, I always advise people not to check yes for this unless you're going to be 100% dedicated and have all of the supports that you can talk about in your project description for that special population. I think people just get hung up on the disability, and they can't really articulate how they have special focus for disabilities and substance use and HIV, and they check all of those boxes, right? So, also for this year in the NOFA, because HUD's, I think, catching up to itself, new projects didn't have to do chronic. You can either do chronic or dedicated plus. We know that dedicated plus is part of the chronic definition. So in this screen, everyone's going to be dedicated plus for a new PSH project. But if you want to focus 100% on chronic, you can do it on this screen. So in years past, the NOFA said every new project for PSH had to be for chronic. And now they're saying you can either be chronic or dedicated plus. Max is giving me a weird look, but I looked in the instructions multiple times yesterday. Okay, then in your project description, we're going to housing first question. These are all check boxes. You need to check yes in order, or no, and remember how this one goes. Doesn't ensure.
One of the questions is a double negative. Read these carefully and ensure that you're clicking on the 4 boxes at the top. If the bottom box indicates as no, it's because a combination of the boxes you selected produced that result. Yeah. So you can play around with this section and click different boxes depending on what your project does or is capable of doing or is saying it will do.
And these are the questions that will allow you to score high on the low barrier portion of the overall score. So we want everyone to be housing first, and we expect everyone to be housing first, so we encourage everyone to check all the boxes. So then there's other additional questions on how the project is going to operate. If you're developing a building, you have to answer these, but no one is doing that. There's questions about whether clients are going to have to live in a particular structure together. So sometimes we see this with the joint project now with transitional housing, because you've found a building owner and all of your units are going to be in one building. So if that's true, like, you just have to justify why you're doing that. Or if this is a project-based building, a project-based project, and everyone's going to live in one building, like, you have to say yes, and then why is that going to happen? And also these questions, the numbering changes based on whatever component style you have. Again, I don't know why this is here, but again, all of our PSH projects should choose Dedicated Plus. We want everyone to be Dedicated Plus. The chronic definition is incorporated in Dedicated Plus. Our prioritization for coordinated entry will continue to be chronics, but we all dream of a day where we will be able to have the flexibility to not just serve chronic households. So we want everyone to be Dedicated Plus. This was something that the board approved a couple of years ago, and which we are continuing. So this isn't just all Chicago telling you to do something. Expansion projects. So again, as we've been talking about already, so new, because HUD loves us and wants us to be in eSNAPs, they're requiring everyone to do 3 project applications, right? So this is the first screen in the new project process where you're indicating that you are going to do an expansion, right? And so what you're asking is, I mean, are you using an existing, I don't know if this is the right screen, I'm sorry. So 2 is where you're asking if you're an expansion. I'm not sure why this is where you click the expansion. Sorry about that. So then when you get to the next screen, depending on which one you choose, it's going to ask you, will the project, it's going to ask you for the PIN and the project name of the original renewal project. So, right, so you need to have that renewal PIN number and the renewal project name to enter here. So this is how HUD is linking everything together. So this is the same way that expansion worked last year. So last year you also had to figure out what the renewal PIN is and then put that in and then put the project name in. So once you do that, you will see that HUD is going to ask you additional questions. So, and we did ask you these questions on our application, so hopefully you don't have to write new answers for them, but like, are you increasing the number of persons served? Are you expanding the services? Are you bringing existing facilities up to safety standards? We didn't ask that in the application process, but that is an option. So if you select yes for 2 or 3, then additional questions are going to populate that you're going to have to answer. So this is where you show, if you check yes to the number of persons, you're going to have to add the number of units and beds that you're going to add. And then if you add yes to services, you're going to have to provide a narrative of what those services are and why you need them. So, okay. So moving on from the expansion, I mean, these are the only specific expansion questions. So just so you're aware, like those of you who are not doing an expansion, you're not going to see any of these questions. You don't have to answer them. So for supportive services, this is where you're getting into these questions about education for individuals and families. Again, based on what you pick, you're going to have to answer more questions. So then again, with 2, I mean, this is a question we put on our application so that you wouldn't have to write a new answer. Like, how are you assisting in obtaining and remaining in permanent housing? I would review the detailed instructions to make sure that your response hits all of the marks that HUD is looking for that question. 3 is, again, a question we put on the application is, how are you assisting those to increase their income? So hopefully you don't have to write a new answer for those. And then everyone's beloved supportive services chart. So we always, I know there's a little bubble that says do at least one. We always advise everyone to do all of them, because if you're really providing holistic services for people, at some point you're probably going to have to connect them to something else. So, you know, if you are the provider of these things and you are doing them, select yourself. If you're not, then, you know, you should select a partner. And then the frequency, and it's okay to have a lot of things as needed. I think single adult projects always fall down with the childcare one, because they're like, none of my people have children. But you may at some point need to just help someone connect their child that doesn't live with them to childcare or something. I don't know. But like, we recommend that everyone just fill out the whole chart. So when we review, Max and I, we're going to be making sure that you fill this out. Most of this section is really just drop downs and check boxes and stuff like that. Okay, so we're getting to 4B. This is really the housing type and location screens. So this is where you're going to be adding what the number of units and the number of beds and the number of dedicated to chronic homeless. So they will ask you this. So again, the application itself wants you to pick chronic or dedicated plus, but then they want you to know if of those dedicated plus beds, are you dedicated anyone to chronic homeless households? So this is your own decision. So once you enter that, and then you have to click add with a little piece of paper, this is where they're going to ask you to select the housing type, right? So most of you, I believe, are doing like scattered site apartments. You might be doing clustered apartments if they're all in one building. You might be doing project-based, so you need to pick your housing type. You need to pick the number of beds and the number of units, and then the address. So the address sometimes trips people up. So if you're doing scattered site, HUD and All Chicago always recommend to put your main offices as the address, and then make sure you pick Chicago for the geocode. For DV projects, so you cannot enter an address. So HUD in the detailed instructions recommends you put a P.O. box as your address because we can't disclose the location of DV service providers, especially if they're project-based. So DV providers should put a P.O. box there, and again, pick the geocode for Chicago. And you should do this as many times as you need to. So if you're doing the joint project and you know that you have a building for your transitional housing, you would do it once for that building. If you are then doing your rapid rehousing component, then you would do another one for rapid rehousing. I mean, we have some providers that know specific buildings or addresses people are going to live in, so they just list those. But really, for scattered site, you just have to put your admin in there. So most of you will only do this one time. Again, the joint one, you have a little extra screen because you need to indicate how many units are for the transitional portion and how many are for the rapid rehousing, and then the beds as well. So again, the HUD guidance is that every 2 resources of rapid rehousing, there should be 1 resource of transitional housing. So most of you are already set up in that configuration, and then you'll have to use the little piece of paper with an arrow to add the location. So as I mentioned before, you may have 1 location for the transitional housing, which is a building you know or have identified, and then the other part will be the building for the rapid rehousing, which will be scattered sites throughout the city. Participation and outreach information. These are our favorite charts in part 5. So again, this is data at a point in time, right? This is the idea that who are you going to be serving when you're full? And we know some of this is not very predictive, but you need to ensure that it also matches to the description you had with the number of beds and units you had in the description, to the number of beds and units you had in the housing part. So we need you to fill this out accurately or to your best of your ability. So there's 2 different tables. 5A is the project participants. So this is households. So one part of it is households with and without children. So make sure your households matches your units, and your total persons is kind of more or less the number of beds. So like if you're doing a family project, you do have to account for how many children you think you're going to have in that project. Subpopulations, right? If you're focusing on the chronically homeless, you would indicate like all of your participants are chronically homeless. I find that some people don't include disabilities, so they're like, yeah, we're doing all chronically homeless, and there's like 20 participants, but none of those participants have disabilities, right? So we know to be chronic, you have to have a disability. So if anything, all those 20 individuals should at least have 1 disability. We do know people have multiple disabilities, so the number in 5B does not have to match the number in 5A. So you should try to, read the tea leaves and think of, in general, how does our population look at a given point in time. So these are the wonderful charts that we have. You'll see ones that have, the top one is the family chart, if you will, whereas there's one adult and at least one child under the age of 18. And then there's the single chart, which is persons without children, and then children only. I don't think anyone is going to have children only. So the thing to remember again is that what 5A and 5B don't have to equal each other, right? 5A, for example, you're going to have a household with at least one adult and one child. So that's one adult and maybe two children. But in 5B, that adult and those children could fall under multiple categories. So as you can see, the adult is a chronically homeless veteran, and because they're a chronically homeless veteran, they have a substance use disability, and they also happen to be a victim of domestic violence, right? And they have two chronically homeless children, and one or both of them have a developmental disability. So as you can see, people will fall under multiple categories in B. So, and again, with B, I always advise people too, if you're going to be special into 100% of a population, like make sure your 100% population is reflected there. So like if you're doing DV, like all of your adult heads of household should be victims of domestic violence, right? So, but they may also have other disabilities, you know, things like that. It's again, weird HUD math that I'm not sure what it means. Questions?
2 questions from a while back, both concerning start dates.
Start dates.
First question: if our only if we're only expanding services and not units, would we then not include any units within the? Oh, I read that one already. I already answered that one. If our new project is an expansion, we have to align the new project start date with the start date of our existing contract.
Yes. Yes. If you're expanding, your start and end date will be the same.
And
I mean the month, not the year, but like.
But like the month and the date.
Yeah.
The same.
Right. So basically, you're saying, you know, if my current grant that I have is June to May, right? Your expansion is also going to be June to May. Just June 2020 to May 2021.
The next question is: if you cannot start on the date you put in the application, can you change that date based on when HUD notifies agencies?
Yes, I think like if you put a start date that says, like if you say you're going to start in April, but then when your HUD rep reaches out to you and says, you know, I see you have a new project, I see you said that you want to start at this time, they do offer you some flexibility to do that. However, you need to make sure you start in 2020. Like you cannot like wait until the end of next year to start. So your local rep usually allows some flexibility. They probably won't allow you to start sooner, but they would definitely let you start later.
And those are the 2 questions that we've had since I answered one that came in as well. So.
All right. Well, we paused before the fun of the budget, so let's go into the budget. So the budget, and again, most of this is just tailored for the new portion for those of you who are expanding, right? So if you're new, like this is your whole thing. So I tailor this to the new portion. When you do the combined, again, you're adding all those points together. So you're going to have several screens about your funding request. Based on what you put in certain screens, other screens will populate for you. One of the things we want you to know is whether you're going to be reallocation, bonus, or both. So for today, if you are a new project and not a DV project, everyone should just put bonus, though some of you may have to switch it later, okay? So we haven't determined who's going to be reallocation and who's going to be a combination, because that's actually going to be probably based on their ranking this year. If you're DV, we want you all to put DV bonus, so that's easy. Some of you may need to switch later on that question, so just be prepared. This is also where you show your indirect cross rate. If your agency does have an indirect cross rate, put it here now. If you intend to use it, you also have to upload the documentation for that. We want to make sure that you're all selecting Illinois, Chicago, Joliet, Naperville as our fair market rent area. And then We always recommend everyone to do a grant term of 1 year. This NOFA does allow some flexibility that you could go up to 18 months, except for expansion. So they're not allowing expansions to go longer. But so those of you who are a legitimate new project, you may think about that. I think for the process so far, we've told everyone they can only do a year. But if you want to talk about that with me, I'm happy to talk about that offline. So this is the chart of allowable costs, right? So these are all the areas that you could apply for. We'll go through some of these in detail as we go through the different screens. No one is doing acquisition, rehab, and construction, so that shouldn't matter. But as you can see, the joint project with the combination between TH and Rapid Housing, you see that you can apply for just about everything. So we'll go through all these. For Rapid Rehousing, as just a reminder, you can only have rental assistance, supportive services, and HMIS. You can't have any operating dollars with a new Rapid Rehousing project. So again, the detailed instructions are one of your guides to understand how to do the budget section and what are the allowable and eligible costs. The other thing I always direct people to, especially for the operating and supportive service and HMIS line items, is the interim rule. So in the interim rule, it gives you a detailed explanation of what counts as an eligible cost. This is the most recent version. It is not the formatted version, so it's kind of a nightmare to scroll through, but you want to go down to subpart D to understand what all of the eligible costs are that you can put into your budget. Sorry, I lost so going into the match funds, of course, these are the funds that are from sources outside of the grant. So HUD always wants you to think of the whole project, right? And what's the amount that you need to do the whole project? So you have your HUD ask, and then you have all the other money that you need to do it, and that's often when your match comes through. So you should do this because you're still not starting for another year, potentially. Do your current commitments. What do you think your current commitments are for match? And then once you go to grant agreement, like HUD will ensure that those are indeed the commitments that you have. So these can be cash or in kind, or a combination of both. If you're doing in kind, you should have an MOU, and it probably would be best to have one for the application itself. And then HUD requires you to have 25% match at a minimum. I would say most of our partners at least have 25% in general. Many of them have more than 25%. And those of you who are doing projects with leasing, this, of course, gets subtracted out when you're calculating your 25%. And there's a lot of FAQs about match, because match, I would say, is one of the single most confusing parts about any HUD grant administration. So getting into, I guess this is less detailed than I thought. So you will see that this is the final screen. This is your summary budget. Everything you put in the previous screens are going to be located on this screen for your new project, so you can check, and it'll go into all the amounts of match and cash match. I do want to say that I think this year we did, in the application process, we used the correct FMR. I know sometimes in years past we had the wrong FMR when you applied to us. Then you went at eSNAPs and you were like, holy cow, everything's wrong. But I think we did it right this year. I mean, basically, we want you to stay within the budget that we've approved for you. If for some reason, like things mathematically with the HUD eSNAPs doesn't work out the way you want it to, then, I mean, give us a call. But I mean, you may just have to make some adjustments and other things. I think if you have other adjustments, like maybe you didn't include any money for HMIS and you want to, like, we can talk about how you could adjust your budget ask that way. You can also use HMIS as match. I would say those of you who are DV providers, HMIS is just the idea of managing your information. HUD acknowledges that you do not use HMIS, so if you need funds for a comparable database, for the computers, the training, or any of that, you can put money in the HMIS line item. But I think, I'm sorry, I thought there was more. I thought I put more things in this one. But really, I think the budget is actually a really easy part of this process because HUD is very prescriptive. It says exactly what you can apply for. Supportive services has all the subline items you can apply for. Operating has all the subline items. So I think that it's in general fairly easy. And if you use the interim rule to determine what's eligible, that will help you as well. So the final thing is attachments. So many of you will not have any attachments, but some of you will. So if you have so sometimes if you're using subrecipients, you have to show the proof of their nonprofit status. Most of you will not do that. If you have an approved indirect cost rate and want to use it, you need to upload that documentation. If you know today that you're going to do in-kind match, you need to provide an MOU. So for example, again, with my example of I'm the housing provider, I'm going to work with Christian Community, and they're going to provide medical services, and they're doing that in an in-kind way. We would have an MOU stating what are the services they're going to provide, what's the frequency of those services, what's the value of those services, and then also ensuring that that value is based on the market rate, right? So I can't go into a relationship with Christian Community and say, they're going to provide medical services and they're going to charge me, $7,000 per person for one visit when we know that the market rate is significantly less than that. So those are the kind of the high level things you need for an in-kind match. New this year is if you're using operating funds to have a replacement reserve and having documentation of that. I don't know, Max, do you have any more guidance on that?
On the replacement reserve?
Yeah.
Actually, they have a specific FA or a splash page on SOC website outlining what that could look like. There's a lot of different documentation that would suffice for, but they're just attempting to ensure that any project that does have operating funds has ability to pay for deferred maintenance on the buildings or any sort of other capital expenses that exist. If you if you go to HUD's website and you look up replacement reserves FY 2019 NOFA, that page and those costs will pop right up.
Okay. Okay, and the last part is the certification, right? Again, when you check this box, and everything you put in the application is what HUD's going to hold you to as doing. So things like being housing first, using coordinated entry, using HMIS. You said yes to all those things. That's what HUD is going to come back and say, but you said yes to this, and why are you not doing it? So you need to check that box to move forward. The summary submission. So you want to make sure that everything on this page has a green check mark next to it if it needs it, right? So on the far right, you're going to see what's mandatory and what's not mandatory. If it's mandatory and you have a red X, you need to do something on that page to rectify that particular point before you can submit. So exporting to PDF. This is important for right now because we do not want you to submit an eSnaps on Monday. We want you to export your new project application to a PDF and send it to us at the COC program's email. So when you get to the submission summary screen, at the bottom, make sure you click Export to PDF, and it will create a PDF of everything that you put in, which is what Max and I want you to send us. If you're doing a new applicant profile, also at the bottom of the submission summary, it will say Export to PDF, create a PDF of your applicant profile, and send that to us as well.
Any additional questions? Why such a short timeline?
Well, actually, it could have been shorter because in years past, we didn't have anyone of the new projects enter into eSnaps until the board approved the list. So this year, we're erring on the side of having you submit now because, so we can get it done sooner. Otherwise, you would have had to wait it until after the 21st, which is even a shorter timeline. I don't know. It's just HUD. I mean, I will blame HUD, but we do have to have everything in eSnaps by the 30th. So that's what truncates the timeline as well. So sorry about that, but I unfortunately it's the same short timeline for everyone.
Do you want both the combined renewals application and new application sent together on Monday?
Yes, that's our next slide. Yes.
Yes. The next question after that is, are we sending export via Survey Gizmo as we did for the renewals? No, you'll be sending those directly to cocprograms@allchicago.org.
Right. So let me finish up. Finishing up is, I just paused because sometimes you have a lot of budget questions. So again, for expansion grants, the whole process for you is going to be 3 parts, right? You already did your renewal project application for the existing grant, so you're getting feedback from All Chicago on that today. Then you're doing a new project application for the new units and or services that you're doing. So this is just for the new stuff, which is what the webinar today was for. And then you also need to do a combined renewal expansion application that includes what is already in existence and what you're proposing in your new project, right? So again, number 1 you've already done. Number 2 is a new project application for FY 2019 that we talked about today. And number 3 is another renewal project application for FY 2019 that you're importing all the data from the existing project, and then you're adding all of the new stuff that you have. And mostly that should be limited to budget changes in the units, updating the narrative to reflect the total number of units, changes to section 5 of those charts, and the budget, of course. Yeah. I think I mentioned that 3 times.
A lot of number changes.
It's going to be a lot of number changing. So like the content of that renewal with the description, because that's really the only narrative section, should not change very much. So for Monday, again, submit a draft PDF of number 2 and number 3 to Max and I at COC Programs. So HUD does give a minimal amount of guidance on this process, and this is the link to that, but it's basically everything that we've told you today. It also goes through who should do it and why, but I think everyone who's applied so far is eligible. So that's the expansion grant. Submit, if you haven't already submitted an applicant profile to All Chicago, please submit the applicant profile as well. And then your new project application. So many of you are expansions, but many of you are also just new, and a few of you do not have COC funding. So if you haven't done an applicant profile, include that, and then your new project application as a PDF. Don't submit an eSnaps. If you do by mistake, we will release it to you. We have the power because we'll need you to make changes. So we put a deadline by 4. If you're having some challenges, just let us know, but that's the general deadline since there's probably about 15 to 20 of you that we have to review. So Max and I will be working hard next week to provide you feedback. We will be able to do it by Friday, but some of you may get it on a rolling basis, just knowing of the timeline. We don't want you to have to wait until Friday and then have like 3 days to do it. So if I'm going to submit back to you on a rolling basis, so we'll try to have everybody done by Friday. And then you may need to make changes based on that feedback. So in the years past, honestly, most of the changes have been with the numbers and the budget part of it. But again, please keep in mind some of the things we did at the beginning of this training about how you're going to be scored, and especially those DV providers on really making sure your application shows your competency in providing services to those to victims of domestic violence, and that you're trauma-informed and victim-centered services. And then we will have everyone submit an eSnaps by the 28th. This is the same deadline for the renewal projects, so this is just a consistent deadline for everybody in the community. And again, we know it's a short turnaround time. So these were, again, the deadlines for Monday. And then finally everything is due on the 28th. And then we can have more questions. And I think we might be done a little early. So if there's lots of questions, we can answer them all.
1 second. Basic question that we received was, will the webinar and slides be available? The short answer is yes, they will.
Yes.
All of this will be posted on our website, and I'm going to post this link basically in the chat. So yes, this information will be posted again and made available to everyone.
We'll try to add the questions too, because I noticed Max was actually writing the answers in, which is great. But yes, we'll post the recording, we'll post the slides, we'll post links to any of the resources we had. We'll do that today. We'll probably also put it in the online learning portal, so you'll have it in 2 locations, but it will be on our website. We know that I know there's a number of people who couldn't attend today, so we need to do that anyways. Okay, well, I'll give a couple more minutes for questions if they come up.
Just so that everyone on the line knows, if you submitted renewal applications for review to our office, we'll be sending those back within the next hour and a half or 2 via email. So if you want to use that information to inform your expansion applications, you'll be able to do so. Short, agencies might not have enough time for an MOU. So can we get a break on it and upload it after the 19th?
Yes, I think we can be flexible with that for sure.
Attachments.
Again, with the MOU and the in-kind, I think if you can get the MOU, that's great. I mean, you may just want to put it down as cash for now and then later switch it to in-kind when you go to grant agreement. I mean, I think that there is flexibility, because one of the things you confirm when you go to grant agreement is what your match is and what the sources are of it. So HUD just wants to see the intentionality of it. But yeah, if it's an MOU that you're missing, feel free to not include that. But I would just put it in the email when you upload your PDF, when you send us your PDFs, to say that you're working on an MOU. So when Max and I are reviewing, we know that would be something that's coming later. Okay, well, I think I'm going to give it 1 more minute and see if there's another question. Again, if you have questions right after this, just email cocprograms@allchicago.org, and we're happy to respond to those questions. We do realize there's a short timeline. We are going to make every effort to respond to your questions in a timely manner. So, but as you know, we're getting all the feedback from the renewals out. So there's also a lot going on our end, but we will make every effort to make sure everyone can get done on time for the 19th. But again, hopefully the work group, the project prioritization work, really tried to ensure that a lot of the questions in the eSNAPs was sort of questions we ask you to write a narrative for, so you don't have to create a whole new application and narratives in eSNAP. So, and those of you who are doing expansions, I think, although burdensome to do the combined expansion, at least they're allowing you to import information from your existing renewal in order to create it. So that burden is a little bit lessened as well. No. So someone asked are you an expansion if you're doing something with ESG funds and not COC funds? The answer is no. So those are separate funding sources. Those are separate application processes. So unfortunately, if you're doing the same thing, but now you want it funded under COC, you have to do a new project application. It's a good question, though. Okay. Okay, I think I'm getting ready to end the webinar, though I always worry that someone's just going to pop another question in right before then. Okay. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I know for some of you it was rather short notice, so I appreciate your time. Again, feel free to email COC programs with any questions. Max and I are very interested and willing and able to help you with these questions. And again, some of those of you who are new to COC funding, if you need some, a call or whatever, please just reach out to us, and we're happy to walk you through anything, because we know that eSNAPS is not super awesome and can be very confusing. So, but we are more than able to help you with that.
Can I say one last thing? Mm-hmm. For eSNAPS, if you are locked out of eSNAPS itself, to unlock your account, you actually need to go to esnaps.hud.gov, the Grantium portal. Do not go directly to HUD's portal and submit your AAQ there. They'll redirect you and it'll slow you down. So where you go to sign into eSNAPS, that is the specific page where you request to have your eSNAPS account unlocked, if it is, or any sort of technical assistance there.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day, and we look forward to hearing from you about your applications.